Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Good day. My name is Liz Powell. I'm the founder and head of G2G Consulting, and I'm kicking off today's webinar on the annual MHSRS conference, which is the Military Health Services Research Symposium. It happens every August in Florida, and they have an abstract deadline to compete to give a poster presentation or lead one of the breakout sessions during the conference that is due in mid-February. So that's coming up just around the corner. So we want to make sure you have all the information you need to navigate the conference, to plan, to make a very strong submission, and also to give you information on how to access DoD funding, which is really critical to a lot of folks in the life sciences. So we're going to start off with a little bit of background. Some of you know us well, some of you are new, so we want to make sure you have that. Then we'll talk about the different government funding sources, how to track grants, how the conference works, key dates, close out with some case studies and final tips and takeaways. First off, some background on G2G. So I started G2G in 2007, built up a team of bipartisan professionals who have worked in and with government for decades. And we have raised $545 million since we started in 2007, all non-dilutive funding, not all for life sciences. A lot of it is, some for nonprofits as well as for-profits. And we've also secured CMS reimbursement. We've shaped regulations, drafted lots of different policies and regulation input, and then we've led various advocacy campaigns. Our niche is life sciences, high-tech innovation, and funding. And then women's health, we've become very active in the past several years, and part of Women's Health Advocates, which is a new initiative we're launching, parts of different coalitions around women's health, and really excited to see funding now dedicated to that space. We've got offices in a few different locations. We've got folks on the team who live and work in Cleveland, live and work in Columbus, live and work in DC area. And then we have regular travel to Boston, Pittsburgh, some other parts of the country, California, getting out to San Francisco area more and more. Just back from a JP Morgan conference, which was fantastic. And then we have all these different affiliates that we work with, the various bio chapters. Many of those dial in for our monthly GBG reporting service, which is our government bioscience grants report. Aditya is going to talk more about that in a minute. We also work with the Defense Health Research Consortium on advocating to Congress the importance of defense health funding. We're part of GRIP Venture Studio, which is a group of folks that are all experts in launching and growing businesses with different lenses. So mine is obviously government advocacy, government funding, but others on the team are experts in pricing, experts in marketing, procurement. So all aspects of what you need to start and launch a business. So it's a great organization. We also collaborate with Springboard and NABO, which are all focused on female founders. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Women's Health Advocates. Just a quick disclaimer that the views we're sharing today are not views of DoD or any government authority. These are our views based on our experience and expertise working with government. And real quick, wanted to cover the government funding sources. So when people talk about getting funding from the government, it really comes from four different ways. So one is legislation, where it's written into law. In an appropriations bill, that's where they designate the funding. An authorization bill just says what they would like to spend, but the appropriation bill is the actual check that comes through. Second are grants, where you just respond to RFPs. Sometimes you can shape RFPs before they even come out, which we're going to talk about. Third is the discretionary money that you get through developing relationships at the end of each fiscal year. There's funds that they need to spend or lose, and so you can access discretionary funding that way. Also, the secretaries of each of the departments have a small amount of money that they have discretion to use. So there is some ways to access some of those dollars. And then the final fourth category is procurement, where that's just straight up contracts with the government. Interestingly, BARDA, which is focused on homeland or sort of mass casualty situations, they are all contracts, whereas the NIH program, those are mostly grants. Through DoD, I've seen both grants and contracts. So depending on the department or agency you're working with, they may do just grants or they may do grants and contracts. The next thing I want to point out is the funding stream. So if you look here on the left side, it tells you the different agencies. So the Department of Defense clearly gets the most funding in all of these fiscal years. So FY22 all the way through to FY25, the most funding by far. NIH has a decent amount of funding, but it is far below Department of Defense. ARPA-H got a nice big chunk of change for transformative health investment from the government, BARDA, and you can see the rest of the list as it goes down. So clearly, if there's a way to fit into the Department of Defense, that is where there's the most funding. And I think we're heading into an administration and a Congress that's going to put a lot of funding into DoD. So if you can find a relationship or a way to access those dollars, you're going to be very successful. And with that, I am passing it on to my colleague, Aditya. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Liz. Hope everyone can hear me okay. So Liz had mentioned at the top our grant tracking service and ways to track grants, one of which, for us, it's the GBG, or Government Bioscience Grants Reporting Service. So this comprises a report that we publish every single month, around the 10th of each month. That's a comprehensive and updated list of live funding opportunities, pre-announcements, and notices of special interest, as well as other engagement opportunities with federal agencies and departments, specifically relevant to life sciences, medical research, and medical technology. And so this curated report is designed for ease of use by entrepreneurs with key information presented in a streamlined fashion, including title, brief, description, issuing agency, funding levels, key deadlines, and links if you are interested in applying and pursuing the opportunity. And so I will say this report does include R&D opportunities that are put up by the Defense Department and VA, including by agencies such as the Defense Health Agency, the Military Health System, affiliated consortia, as well as opportunities from agencies like DARPA, including specific programs linked to their Biological Technologies Office. And so this includes things like broad agency announcements, multi-topic calls, targeted program calls, and medical product SBIR announcements. And so related to the report, we do a free webinar every third Thursday of the month at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So one week after the report's publication. And so for the first 30 minutes, we discuss highlights from the report. And then for the second half hour from 12:30 to 1, we host a customers-only consultation session that is open to our clients, companies, or individuals that have purchased the reporting service. And during that time, we provide more in-depth analysis on trends that we're seeing impacting the funding landscapes, new initiatives coming down the pipeline, as well as how decisions made in Washington are impacting access to capital and the bottom line for companies in life sciences and medtech space, as well as specific questions that you might have. And so this service and both the report and access to the entire reporting service webinar is provided to companies, again, that work with us as clients, but also to it's also a membership benefit for organizations that are affiliated with these biochapters and other organizations like NC Biotech and Focus Ultrasound Foundation. So if you are not already aware of it, if you're not already aware of it, I would advise you to take advantage of this member benefit. And so just in the last week in January, there were about 15 folks from various chapters of Dowlin, and we anticipate that this list of chapters that are using this benefit will increase in the near future. Next slide. So before we go into discussion of the conference, I wanted to touch upon this slide helps set the stage for to help folks understand the true breadth of the military health system, or MHS, as well as the independent veterans health system. So MHS is a major part of the Defense Department. There's 9.5 million beneficiaries, scores of hospitals and medical centers, hundreds of military medical clinics. Likewise with Veterans Affairs, you have 23 integrated service networks, or VSINs, hundreds of outpatient clinics, nursing homes, and domiciliaries. And we're sharing those numbers just to give you an idea of what the opportunity space is. If you have a product or service in your pipeline that can meet key needs of these systems, improve care outcomes or conditions, or even reframe or reorient an existing product or service that you have, um, there's just a very large potential market space. And so I just wanted to again stress that there is a very large budget associated with these platforms, with these systems, excuse me. $58 billion is affiliated with the military health system, or 7% of the entire DoD outlay, and 140 billion with the Veterans Administration. And just to put a finer point, these aren't on these slides, but in terms of specific areas of interest in R&D with these systems. So with military health system, it's wound healing, regenerative medicine, infectious disease, sensors, traumatic brain injury, PTSD, expeditionary medicine. That's the provision of care in isolated or austere environments, related things like combat casualty care, en route care. So if you have technologies in that spectrum, and again, that list I just described is not exhaustive, there's definitely opportunities for you to engage with the military. And then with veterans, slightly different, but that includes the areas of focus such as rehabilitation, chronic conditions, health IT, and hospital care. And lastly, go ahead. So going into the conference in a little bit more detail, the Military Health System Research Symposium, or MHSRS. So as has been mentioned at the top, this is the largest military medical conference of the year. It lasts 4 days and is expected to be held in early August, August 4th to 7th in Kissimmee, Florida. And so it's well attended by people from various quarters, including from industry, academia, clinicians, researchers, and DoD affiliates, DoD program managers, as well as folks from VA and contract managers. Last year, it was the highest attendance on record. I believe 4,400 people are estimated to have attended. So it's not a small meeting by any stretch of the imagination. And so the conference is divided into 4 really broad topic areas: warfighter, readiness, warfighter medical readiness, expeditionary medicine, warfighter performance, and return to duty. And so this encompasses more specific subtopic areas that I just described on the previous slide, like infectious disease, hemorrhage control, blood products, pain management, things of that nature. Those in turn are divided into about 70 breakout sessions, which again are divided into podium presentations and poster sessions, as is the case with any scientific conference. And so the forum also provides an opportunity for vendors to highlight their products and services in an exhibit hall. G2G has had one for the past 2 conferences, and we've found that to be very beneficial. And so while doing a podium or poster presentation certainly elevates your profile at this conference, it's not necessarily, and we'll go to the details of that shortly, you certainly don't have to submit an abstract to attend the meeting and make the most of it. There's benefits to attend this conference, even if your work or product doesn't align, at least at the current time, precisely with any of the breakout sessions. One piece is key insights that you can glean from high-level military leaders, all of whom or most of whom attend this conference. You learn about emerging priorities of the military health system, which do tend to vary from year to year, even if there's some consistent themes. And that knowledge can really help you frame your work so that it is better aligned with military priorities and requirements. It's, of course, an unparalleled opportunity to network. Folks who are, just not necessarily publicly facing do tend to attend this conference. And, there's so many opportunities to catch them, meet with them over lunch, over breakfast, during the breakout sessions, in between the breakout sessions, in ways that I can't really describe without, actually being there. And even if you meet someone and they're not the right person to link up with, chances are they have 4 or 5 other people in their network that they can link you up with who might be able to provide a lead, whether it's on a collaboration or funding or something of that nature. And so lastly, it sounds somewhat basic, but just gaining exposure to the whole system, it's just a major plus that you get from being at this conference. And while it can be a bit overwhelming, downstream rewards of successfully engaging and working this conference, as we do every single year, are many. It takes time, but you have to start somewhere, and this is a great place to start. Could you go to the next slide, please? So I won't dwell too much on this slide, but I wanted to reiterate that if you present your work either in the form of if you intend to present your work either in the form of a podium or a poster, abstract submission is open now and will close in about a month's time on February 16th. The website has been revamped a little bit since last year, but the fundamental layout remains the same. And we'll provide the link to learn more and submit your abstract in the chat. Next slide, please. So delving a little bit more into formatting of abstracts. And so like with other scientific conferences, you're going to have to register on the conference website and sign a disclosure form. Whatever you submit for this has to be original, unpublished work. And so if you are considering options in terms of what conferences you'll attend this year, be aware that you can submit the same or similar abstracts to MHSRS and other meetings, but of course you'll have to choose to present only at one if you're accepted to both or multiple conferences. And I will stress that even though this is a unique forum, this still is a scientific conference. And so explicit product promotion pitches or things of that nature are not allowed in the main venues of the conference outside of the exhibit hall. And so going a little bit more into formatting, which you can see at the bottom here, your abstract is going to be exclusively plain text with no visuals, which is something that might be a challenge for some folks, but that's just how they're doing it at this forum. And so it's imperative to think about how you can get your message across in words and just a few words. Brevity is definitely the name of the game here. The length of the abstract, all components of it are quite short. So a somewhat descriptive title, but a body is only about 2,500 characters. So that's about 300 words. So it's shorter than a lot of abstracts that you might be familiar with. And then additionally, in addition to the disclaimer, you do need to explicitly spell out learning objectives. And so they define that as action words. What can attendees who attend your talk or your poster presentation be able to do or learn? And that needs action verbs like describe, analyze, discuss. And they have strict limits as to how many characters you can link to each objective. And so going on to abstract types. For this is the third consecutive year that they have had two options for abstract submission. The first is pretty much your conventional research abstract. So, introduction, materials, methods, results, conclusions, all within that, truncated character format, truncated character length that I just described. The second is more geared towards technologies that are well beyond, your basic R&D phase and have, are able to or do meet critical capability gaps that the military and DoD have. And so there's a little bit more finer tuned items you have to include here, including capability description, technical approach, the roles of care, which, there's different roles of care depending on where you are in the combat zone or an MTF. So that's referring to, as well as, more explicitly describing, the link to the warfighter. So I will transition to the next slide, to Liz.
Great, thank you so much. There we go. Back. Okay. So we're just going to close out with some case studies and then take your questions. So please post your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end. So here's an example of a company that had a great innovation that addresses an unmet need, and it's actually a national security interest, and thought it was a slam dunk, went to talk to a bunch of VCs and got a no across the board. Really frustrated. He tried to think, well, could I go to government and get support there? So what their innovation does is it addresses a huge problem with heparin that is used in 25% of pregnancies. Anyone who's in the hospital at some point usually has heparin to address clotting. And right now, we use the vast majority of our heparin we get from Chinese pigs. So it's animal and from China. So a lot of issues, and yet it's fairly cheap. So that's why a lot of VCs weren't that interested. So What we did is we created a whole plan for them of who to talk to in Congress and in agencies to go after, to educate, build support, and go after funding. And the tricky part is the funding they wanted was really for manufacturing, and to scale up, and to basically create, heparin manufactured in the US that has actually better quality than animal-based heparin, and addresses national security interests in addition to helping patients. And so we talked to several folks. We brought them to MHSRS and actually sat down with some of the key leadership. And you have to knock on several doors. It's not always just knock on one and done. And so we were persistent, consistent, polite, making sure they understood our capabilities, how we actually met a very important military need. And they then were very supportive. And so we actually got the support of Congress. We were in 4 different pieces of legislation, around addressing this issue of over-reliance on Chinese pigs for heparin. And then we got funding. We did a new collaboration with the medical wing, in Texas. And then we got $2 million from Biomaid, which is through Department of Defense. So I think some key takeaways are explaining your innovation in a way that resonates. That was really important. Investing in relationships and education, attending MHSRS for those in-person connections, super, super helpful. And then following up and staying engaged is really important. Another case study, funding for a biologics, innovation. And so this is in orthopedics, and they were seeking government R&D funding. They had some connections with an aspect of DoD, but did not know where to go to get that clinical, research support, and funding. And so we provided, those introductions of who to talk to and where those funding sources are that would fund that type of work, that type of research. We did several meetings, definitely MHSRS, but also Fort Detrick, Fort Sam Houston, and maintained a constant presence and engagement, and really listened to what the program managers were interested in funding and how it could align. And keywords around readiness and performance was really important too in this effort. In the end, we ended up getting about $2.5 million from a few different sources. The AFWorks program is another great program. It starts out with low funding levels, but once you can match it, it can get up, into the millions. So that's a really great program. In addition to USAMRDC, which is the Military Research and Development Command at Fort Detrick. We definitely did a few different visits there, talked with a few different folks before we really found our champion, to pull through funds for them. So some takeaways there are working closely with the DoD to meet their requirements. The requirements language is something you'll hear a lot in the DoD. They won't publish it, but somehow we're supposed to know, how we can align with their requirements. So the way you find out those requirements is having those relationships with program managers and people controlling funds within DoD. That's how you're going to learn that, because they're not going to give you a nice organized list. And by the way, I get this question all the time. Can you just send me that list of all those defense, funding sources? It's not some beautifully well organized list. It actually keeps evolving, especially with the recent consolidation of efforts of medical research within DHA, Defense Health Agency. So it's tricky. It's not a constant process. And so it really is worthwhile to invest the time and build these relationships and find out from program managers what their priorities are, what these requirements are, what they're trying to do, and how you can align with that. I mean, I think a lot of what we're doing is matchmaking. We want to match those opportunities. So relationships, 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 you'll hear that over and over again. And then timing your interactions, your communications and submissions to align with the DoD process is super important too. All right, final case study. This one is, finding funding across government, so not just DoD, but beyond. They were new to it all. They had done NIH, SBIR, but they did not know any of the other resources or who to talk to, and how all those different avenues of funding worked. So we researched for them all the different funding sources, where to go for each one. We positioned them with each of the targets. It involved Congress, Department of Defense, BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, and then definitely MHSRS. And they became so active in MHSRS, they actually did an exhibit, booth, for several years as well. So we did lots of meetings, and we were able to get funding from many different sources. And it's not like the these multi-millions of dollars came all at once. It took years to build relationships to get the constant flow of funds year after year after year. And some of this was congressionally earmarked money. Some of it was direct contracts and grants with government, with DARPA. There was a BARDA contract that was a huge contract that had a whole list of milestones to be met to reach that top number. So it was a lot of different sources coming together, and it was over several years. But that first year, I think it was about 2 million the first year, and then we were able to build off of that. And so the takeaways there are engaging and comprehensive advocacy tailored to the target. So obviously, for all of these examples, when we're talking to Congress, they want to know about jobs and business growth in their district. Sure, they definitely care about patients, but I think that economic impact is super important for members. And when you talk to agencies, if you're talking to DoD, it's about the warfighter. Is this portable? Is it ruggedized? Like, how does it address readiness, performance? So talking in their lingo is super important. And then for BARDA, it's how do we respond quickly and effectively to any kind of homeland security issue in that health sphere. And so mass casualty is a huge issue. And so we want to change our language to talk about civilians and mass casualty settings and medical countermeasures. So super, super important that you tailor how you communicate to your audience. Obviously, attending MHSRS was huge for them. As I said, they did an exhibit booth. They became super active and well known within leadership, not just the program managers. So that took a lot of being persistent, helpful, and reliable over the years. Keeping your word. You say you're going to deliver on something, you have to deliver on that. I've heard regularly from DoD program managers in particular, one over at NSF, about the importance of following directions when you make submissions, doing what you say you will do, keeping your words is very important. And it's okay to hit snags and hurdles. Be honest about it. So that communication, that transparency is super important in building these relationships and being able to secure funding year after year. And for our final tips, I'm going to pass it back to Aditya.
Thanks, Liz. And so just in terms of, high level pointers, tracking opportunities is very important. It's something that we do every day. Heather and our team is, the master of looking at everything that the DoD and, other agencies put out. And again, that's something we do on a regular basis, to keep track of where the DoD is going in terms of its priorities. Second part of that, of course, is conferences, like MHSRS, but not exclusively MHSRS. There's a bunch of other conferences that are both DoD and VA focused throughout the year. That, if you want to engage sooner or you want a smaller sort of forum to meet with folks. There's a couple that are coming up. For example, in March, we'll be attending the Operational Medicine Symposium in San Antonio. And then in April, May, you have the Military Health System Conference that's over in Cleveland. And, they're not often well advertised, but, if you know where to look, you can keep abreast of them. That's something that we're on top of. Engaging with folks anywhere that's possible is always a good idea. Secondly, I think we touched upon this at a high level, but crafting your messaging in engaging with folks at these forums is important. You can't just talk about it the same way that you talk about it with your colleagues or subject matter experts that you've been working with for a long time, or even just emulate exactly how you talk about your innovation with someone at NIH or an agency that's more solely focused on health and human services. So what we advise folks who are working with who are engaging in this space is to create a very streamlined, tailored set of messaging, what we call a white paper. So issue, problem, solution, very streamlined so that someone who's busy, you're catching only for 30 seconds in the hallway at this type of conference can see quickly what you're doing and, why it's important. And, we found that to be highly effective, and that sort of leads to follow-on conversations. Moving along, I mean, it might be sort of a moot point, but you really should understand what you're applying for. A lot of these solicitations that we engage with on the defense and the VA side, they're very long and detailed. They have a lot of requirements, a lot of different tables, a lot of different components that you may not be familiar with, but it's really important to understand all of those. Just skipping one thing just because it's not relevant to you or you don't think it's relevant is not a recipe for success. If they put something out, they want you to address it in some way or form. And in terms of that same, that vein, understanding what you're applying for, talking to program managers is super, super important. They can help you deduce and read between the lines in a solicitation if something's not clear. And you want to be early in terms of, well before you even consider if you even find an opportunity. Just talk to program managers and, talk about what their interests are and be a resource for them. Don't just go into the sort of relationship where you have something and you want them to fund it. That's not exactly the best way to go about doing it. You want to be ahead of that funding cycle and sort of, engage on a higher level initially. Other items, definitely the military is very strict on deadlines and budget guidelines. If they say something is due at a certain time, it's due then. Similar with budget, at least with these types of solicitations in the health space. Another key thing that we advise, and this just doesn't go for this space, but just generally, if you are new to government funding, non-dilutive funding, get all of your registrations on federal funding portals done. This includes your grants.gov registration, your eBRAP registration, your SAM.gov registration. Those all take time to set up, verifying your company's situation, tax issues, all that kind of thing. So that takes time. And so if you find an opportunity that's due in like 2 months, you're like, oh, I can get this done, but you don't have all of those registrations put together, your plans might be derailed. Other items, keep your messaging clear, short, concise, as I said before. They are pretty good about putting out, at least with certain programs, putting out past awardees. So that's always a good portal into seeing what has been funded in the past, and gives you an insight into, if you're doing work that's largely similar to something that's already been funded and funded repeatedly, it may not be the best idea to go down that same route with your technology. So that's definitely something we would advise. And they also post grant reviewers online for programs such as the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. So looking at their bios, their backgrounds is also a good idea in terms of figuring out what they're interested in. In terms of who controls funding, in the end, program managers decide at the granular level, but I would say you want to look at what the higher level issues are. That includes leadership at the DoD, Congress, who actually, appropriates the funding. So looking at what those priorities are from folks who are controlling those streams is important. Another item that we touched upon, a key way that DoD is dispersing a lot of funding is through consortia. So these are public-private partnerships that that bring together folks from industry, academia, nonprofits to, address specific problem spaces. We mentioned BioMade in one of the case studies before. That's focused on bioindustrial manufacturing. There's others like BioFab USA and Army, which is focused on regenerative medicine solutions for the warfighter. There's MTech, that's the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium. So that focuses on solution development for military personnel. There's MCDC, which is focused on solutions specifically for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. So there's a lot of different options for you to join and sort of team together. That's a big component. A lot of small companies may not be able to, meet DoD requirements by themselves, but these consortia offer you a way to collaborate and pull together resources with like-minded groups to meet common aims. And all these consortia, they have individual conferences where members are able to engage and sort of put together proposals, pitch proposals to program managers, things of that nature. And that's especially true for certain broad agency announcements or BAAs. Wrapping this up, collaborations, even if you're not looking, even if you can't get funding initially, like a grant or a specific award that's for you to develop a certain product, the military is very open to collaborations through cooperative research and development agreements, or CRADAs, through their various research institutes, through their MTFs. As was alluded to in one of the case studies, there was a collaboration that we helped facilitate with the 59th Medical Wing that sort of set the stage down the line for them to receive funding. And so that's also an option for you if your product does not, develop, but it, fits the space. Talk with someone, investigator at the DoD, at a DoD MTF, to see if they're open to, if they have funds to, if they're open to doing collaborations on certain areas that you wish to pursue. And lastly, as has been said before, this takes time. It's not a one and done. That's rarely the case. You have to be persistent, build those relationships over time, and work to align with opportunities and also help shape them over time. So it's a long-term process, but the rewards can be multifold if you do it correctly. I think that is it.
Do you want to lead us through questions?
Sure. Heather, could you take the slide? Could you take the slides down, please? All right. Let's see. Yeah, please feel free to type there's already a few questions here. Let's go at the bottom. So does the DoD have, Liz, I'll direct this to you. Does the DoD have any interest in women's health, particularly issues like perimenopause?
Yep, there's some indication that there will be funding for menopause because it is such a popular issue. Right now, it's sort of the issue everyone's talking about, and it's very bipartisan. So I think that there will be some funding. I don't have any more details at this point. We're still waiting to see the president's budget and what they put into the final omnibus for last year. So we're watching it. And there is a new leader over at HHS, the acting Secretary of Health and Human Services, actually has a strong background in menopause as well. So there could be some opportunities there too. So we're tracking and trying to support that. And in fact, we're doing a letter to President Trump right now on supporting women's health in his budget proposal that he's working on. And so I'll post that here in case you want to sign on to that letter or get involved.
Let me just mark that as. Are there regional focused MHSRS type conferences for California? I don't know if you're asking in terms of specific companies in California. I know that there's definitely conferences that are in California, given the strong defense environment there. I can't think of. I don't think any of the ones that we're tracking the short term are in. I think either are come to mind, but I know there have been ones in San Francisco, in San Diego. And again, a lot of those are consortium based. I know Biomade and MTech that I mentioned before, they have meetings, that are pretty dispersed. But yes, they do happen in California on the West Coast. It's not focused in any one particular area. I was going to ask about their appetite for women's health. I guess we've sort of answered that already. So will the FY 2025 VHA and DoD shift in the next few months post inauguration, and when will that be published? I think they're asking about the budgeting timeline. Liz, you want to take that again?
Yeah, the budgeting timeline. So right now they have to finish the current appropriations process. They have until March 14th. They have a continuing resolution that just level funds everything. So they're going to come up with a new omnibus bill to close out this current fiscal year that's halfway over. If they do a year-long continuing resolution, they can't do any new funding, and that would take out all the earmark projects or community project funding in the House, congressionally directed spending in the Senate. So I think it's unlikely they'll do a year-long CR. I think that they'll come up with something. So that is happening. And then simultaneously, President Trump is working on his budget proposal. And since he has been through this before, he's moving at very fast pace. So I think he's going to come out with his proposal as close to on time as can be, which is usually that first week of February. So I think he's going to come out with that fairly soon. And often they'll do a skinny budget, which is sort of that overview, and then a more detailed budget a few weeks later or a month later. So that might happen. Amidst all of that, they have to do what's called budget reconciliation, which only requires a simple majority, which they have in the House and Senate. If they come up with a budget resolution they can all agree on, then that will set the parameters for the appropriations bills for FY 2026. So that's sort of where we are in the whole budget process. In the meantime, all the programs, departments are still running their programs. So the SBIR program, for example, is still going. It's just new funding programs, new initiatives are often on hold until they finish the omnibus appropriations process for FY 25. So hopefully that's helpful.
I see some people can't see what's in the chat. Not sure. Not sure what's going on, but just FYI, I'm sorry that you're having that difficulty. We'll make sure to send whatever links we're sharing in our follow-up, but I'm not sure. I think other folks are able to access it. Yeah, we'll send it after. Sorry about that. Have you seen any grants come forward related to improving training initiatives around cardiovascular and vascular health, especially for veterans? Let me think off the top of my head. There definitely are grants for training in that space, whether it's specifically for veterans, that I'm not certain about. I think for veterans, you also, another thing that we, in terms of engaging with VA, you definitely need to have a champion on the inside at the VA, at VHA, who's involved in that space. So I think it would come out of a relationship or collaboration with an investigator that's involved in that space. So it's not going to be, I think most of the training grants I've seen in that space are more NIH focused rather than VA focused. So I would seek out, collaborators who work in that space, or doctors or research physician scientists who are in that space at VA. Let's see. Survive, done. Can you talk? Actually, there's one. How do you recommend searching for seeking out program managers? Like I said before, especially and for some agencies, they publicize it. In others they don't. So it's a bit of it really depends on where you're engaging. So with, agencies like DARPA, they have their list of program managers with the different offices all listed on their website. So it's relatively not straightforward, but it's relatively easy to find those out. So if there's a DARPA solicitation or you have an idea that's aligned with what DARPA is doing, you can figure that out easily. Similarly, with some solicitations, they put out a key point of contact on the solicitation. And so in that case, it's easy. But if you have a technology that's aligned with an area, but it's not with a specific solicitation, that's where it's a little bit more difficult. They might give you a high level program contact or just a general point of contact that's not linked to a specific person. So that's why going to these meetings that we've just described is super important, because you can actually connect with people in person that don't have a very high public profile but are key decision makers. So it's a mix of both, looking in the right places, but also going to the right events and doing that consistently over time. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, not DoD related, but I know you touched upon this before, Liz. Can you talk a little bit more about internal NIH changes that might affect grants?
So there's a proposal out there to consolidate the 27 different research institutes and centers down to like 15. And there's some nervousness around that because that would it would make it very easy to just slash funding that way. So by consolidating, that shrinks and enables to cut funding. interestingly, there's a proposal that was put out by the authorizing committee, and then that language was put into the House version of the appropriations bill for FY25. That was not included in the Senate version. However, the Senate authorizing committee, Republican, in the minority at the time last year, now the majority chair, also has a proposal out there to do some kind of consolidation or restructure at NIH. So I think that there is a movement afoot to make that happen. Now, will that get suddenly slapped into this omnibus bill for FY25? Or will they maybe dip their toe in it, start to do something around that, but then do hearings through the authorizing committees, through the formal traditional legislative process? I think many prefer the latter so that you can actually have a real discussion and in-depth look at what's the best way to do some restructuring. I think everyone agrees there's some restructuring that would be beneficial and there's some redundancies. And so there is progress to be made in doing this, but just suddenly going from 27 to 15 is a huge shift without any kind of discussion or deliberation behind it. So I think a lot of folks, and myself included, would prefer using the traditional legislative process to really map out what makes the most sense. So we will see. We'll see what happens. The ranking on appropriations, at least in the House side, has commented publicly that she doesn't necessarily oppose restructure. She just wants to use the traditional process. So it's up in the air for now. If you have a voice, if you have a chance to talk to your own member of Congress, I would explain the nuances of it and that it's better to really think out all the steps involved in that restructure as opposed to just quickly slashing and consolidating with it with just two sentences in an appropriations bill. It should really be an authorization bill that does that. So that's something that we're definitely advocating for. So hopefully that explains that one.
Okay, let's see a couple more. Oh, does the focused ultrasound initiative include latest high resolution ultrasound imaging of endometriosis tumors and endometriose? Yes, as far as I'm aware, and we are happy to, we can certainly put you in contact with folks if you're interested. But
There's
yes.
so many different applications for focused ultrasound. It's sort of this hidden gem, especially fibroid tumors as well. It can shrink them so that you don't have to have this very disruptive surgery, put you out for 6 to 8 weeks. You can just go in, do focused ultrasound, and then go back to work. So whether it's, fibroid tumors, endometriosis, pancreatic cancer, something like 160 different applications for ultrasound. So we're really excited about this innovative technology, and we have been talking with Congress and agencies for a while on it and getting great response and great interest. So if you are at all interested in that topic, please let us know. And we'd love to connect you with the Focused Ultrasound Foundation, with some of the different offices that we're working with. I think that there's a lot of interest there.
Okay, just a couple more. Again, not directly DoD or VA, but how will US pull out from the WHO affect FDA med device safety and quality initiatives around introducing new technologies into healthcare to improve patient outcomes and procedural efficiencies? I can say a little bit about it, and then I don't know if Lizzie, if you have additional thoughts. I will say that the EO on withdrawing from the WHO, a lot of that was focused on infectious disease, issues with the infectious disease, regimen that they had in response to it, something back from the pandemic. So my thought is that it remains to be seen exactly what FDA's response is going to be to that. My thought is, given that the pick for the FDA commissioner is more along the conventional line of someone who has that role, a lot of folks are indicating that they expect it to generally operate as usual. Again, there's a lot that remains up in the air. I think a lot of folks, have issues with how the FDA works, but I think they also want to make sure that we're seeing safety and quality maintained. There's some other voices in the administration that are, trying to move a shift towards, having things approved with just safety in mind, or not necessarily efficacy. I don't think those are the loudest voices in the room necessarily, but those have come up and something that we're tracking. I don't know if Liz, you have anything else you wanted to add there?
Yeah, it remains to be seen. folks who work in public health and healthcare want it to work effectively. And so just because we withdraw from the World Health Organization doesn't mean there won't be communication, collaboration. I mean, there has to be in many ways. So we have to see what happens, how they actually execute. But I agree with everything Aditya said that a lot of the folks that are um, in that operational position within government now are folks from business, folks from industry, folks who know how things work and want to make sure systems are effective. So let's just see how that all unfolds and how they actually execute that. So that's our answer for now. We'll see in a few months.
Um, oh, sorry, at the top. How long did this, I think this is just referring to some of the case studies that you highlighted, Liz. How long did this take from initial contact to funding?
One day. No, I'm kidding. Um, I wish. No, it takes months, years to be effective in this process in accessing funding, building relationships, shaping regulations, whatever it is you're going after. You have to go in wide-eyed that it's not going to be one meeting and done. That's just not how government works. You have to meet with folks repeatedly, continue to educate them, let them marinate, come back again. You have to show them the exact line of the bill or the exact program within an agency. You have to listen to what their priorities are or requirements, especially that's the keyword within DoD, and align with that. That's what's really important. And I have to say, I can count on more than one hand at this point the number of times where being at MHSRS to talk in person made the difference. That is where they said, yes, we want to fund this. Yes, make the submission. Here's what you need to do. Like those types of details. It's hard to get that in an email, or even on a Zoom call. Although I think Zoom has opened the doors, leveled the playing field a bit, for that access. There's nothing like being in person. We all know this, right? So going to MHSRS, seeing people in person, putting in the time, you can get results, but it will take months. It probably was at least a year for all those case studies. It was probably about a year before we saw any dollars, and some it was a year and a half. Some we knew in a year and a half or 2 years the money was coming, but it wasn't in hand. It took more months to get it. So it's not a quick process. It definitely takes time. But that's how you have influence. That's how you have relationships. That's how to be effective long term. So that's the truth. That's how it works.
Let's see. Just seeing the comment from Gerald, who asked about focus ultrasound. Yeah, certainly. We'll make sure to connect you with the right folks there. But thanks again for bringing that up. Then lastly, how do we work with G2G? $1 million question.
Yeah, we'd love to work with you. So we work with lots of different bioscience companies, organizations, and help them navigate government. Many want that non-dilutive funding. There is millions and millions of dollars that you could be pursuing. So number one, we figure out who to go after for funding, who those targets are, the timing involved, the scope of work, and we put all that together in a strategic roadmap. Second, we work on that messaging, as we talked about repeatedly, making sure that your message resonates with your targets is super important. So we will put together white papers that lay out problem, solution, results. And then third, we'll start to set up those meetings and introductions so that we can develop those relationships and we can listen to what those program managers, what the congressional offices are focused on so that we are aligning and using their words in our submissions or in our language that we're putting forward. So that is how we work. I would say it's a good 3 to 4 months before you really see traction, and you should know if this is working. And we are getting good response. We're getting interest. We're starting to build champions. And then, as I said, it's probably definitely a year though before you have dollars coming through. And then there's other things around market adoption. We've done some creative language and legislation. We've done CMS reimbursement. So there's other things obviously that affect the growth of your company and being successful in the marketplace. And we're happy to strategize and come up with a plan for you. So thanks, Aditya. So that's my email, lpowell@g2gconsulting.com. And we're here to be helpful if we can be for you. And we've also done short-term projects where we just guide folks through the MHSRS abstract program and then the MHSRS conference itself. So we can do that too. So whatever is of interest to you, we're happy to be helpful.
And lastly, I think you sort of touched upon this earlier, Liz, but is it better to chase, I think I know the answer. Is it better to chase RFPs or concentrate on working with someone to write a bill for funding new technologies to improve VHA patient care? My thought is it's probably, why not both? But I'll defer to you since you probably have a more eloquent answer.
We've done both. So we've done efforts where we carved out funding specifically for our company, and we've done efforts where we carved out funding for a specific cause, like rare cancer. There was no funding line for rare cancer ever before. And we took it to Capitol Hill, we lobbied the heck out of it, we educated all these members of Congress. We got language and funding lines inserted into bills, one of which still stands today, many years later. It's a rare cancer funding line in the Department of Defense. And that funding line benefits everyone who's working in rare cancer research. It definitely benefited our client, but it's everyone in that space. So it depends on if your goal is to elevate an issue and make sure that is being addressed, or your specific company and your innovation. There's lots of ways to carve out funding lines, and that's what we love to do. So shoot me an email if you want to talk in more detail about what you're thinking about doing, and we can give you a more precise answer. But we've done both, and both work. So,
Well,
are we about done with our questions?
I think we are. I think we've answered them, or yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for dialing in, everyone. Really appreciate it, and hope you have a great day. We're always available to you if you have any follow-up questions. And then remember, every third Thursday of the month at noon Eastern Time, we have our GBG reporting service webinar, free and open to all from 12 to 12:30. So look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Thanks so much.